The US is now officially preparing to buy Bitcoin. This was just confirmed by Donald Trump's executive manager of digital assets, Bo Hines, who now says, and get this, we want to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. So there's no limit on the upside. We want to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible. He also mentions that there will be further discussions about buying all the Bitcoin in a budget-neutral way. So the whole thing is still supposed to work in a budget-neutral way. And I actually made a video here just a few days ago about this very topic, where Bo Hines apparently said via a leak here that the USA wants to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. And now there is actually an excerpt here where he confirms it all again. So we no longer have this as a leak. We're now going to look at his massive statements where the plan behind the US is confirmed again, what they intend to do, how much Bitcoin they want to accumulate, and a lot more. That's super bullish. Sure, the Bitcoin price may not necessarily explode right now because many people don't really understand what's going on here. Also, we're still in that risk-off sentiment. I've told you this before. As long as we're in this risk-off sentiment, the craziest news can come out, but the Bitcoin price probably won't perform massively upward. We're definitely going to take a look at Bo Hines' statements now. Afterwards, we have an exciting assessment from Dimitri Speck, a gold expert who also has some very interesting insights into Bitcoin. It's always interesting to get insights from someone who isn't coming from the Bitcoin maximalist camp, but has a different perspective on Bitcoin. But let's hear what Bo Hines, the executive manager or director of digital assets, has to say directly from the White House. Well, the interview isn't actually from the White House, but as I understand it, he's employed there.
Well, we delivered on the president's promises that he made on the campaign trail. The president was adamant about creating the SBR. We wanted to make sure that we did it right in a way that respected Bitcoin for being so unique, and also gave credence to innovation in other spaces of the digital asset world. So, for us here, we look at Bitcoin, it's not a security, it's a commodity. It has intrinsic stored value that's traditionally accepted.
He says here that he's keeping Donald Trump's promise since he's a consultant or part of the Trump team. He says that he's working on the strategic Bitcoin reserve, emphasizing that Bitcoin has some really unique properties. It's a store of value. He talks about how it's not a security, but rather a commodity, a digital raw material. He discusses the unique properties that set Bitcoin apart from gold, stocks, or other securities.
It has intrinsic stored value that's traditionally accepted. It has, as David likes to describe, the immaculate conception. There's no issuer. And, that's why, as you saw in the executive order, we compared this to digital gold. It's something that's imperative for the United States to have, retain.
So now he goes even further. He says it is institutionally accepted. It is something like digital gold, and it has no issuer. So you can really see here that they have done their homework, which means that with Donald Trump, you are never quite sure, okay, does he understand Bitcoin? Does he not understand Bitcoin? But we know, for example, David Sachs is definitely deep into the topic. We can see it here with Bo Hines that he is clearly talking about an asset without an issuer. And it is really, really crazy that Bitcoin is now accepted as a store of value on the same level as gold. And I was talking about it yesterday, and Michael Saylor also said that Donald Trump is the first president to legitimize an asset here in the USA, and that is Bitcoin. In the past, silver and gold were mentioned in the Constitution, but these days that's not really taken into account as much, so it's kind of being overlooked. And now we have a president who accepts Bitcoin as an official asset, recognizes it as a store of value, and wants to build a strategic stockpile. And now we're getting to the relevant statements where things are really going to heat up.
States to have, retain, continue to build on. And I think that's worth pointing out that, the way that this is constructed, we talked about ways of acquiring more Bitcoin in budget neutral ways that won't cost the taxpayer a dime. And what I like to say about this president, I think it's high time that our president started accumulating assets for the American people, which is what President Trump is doing, rather than taking it away. And I think that's one thing that we really wanted to make clear in this executive order. And we're looking forward to working with our partners at Treasury and the Secretary of Commerce in order to find those budget neutral ways in which we can acquire more. I've been asked all the time, it's like, how much do you want? And I said, well, that's like asking a country, how much gold do you want, right? I mean, as much as we can get.
And I think that's one of the most bullish statements we've heard since Trump was president. It doesn't get much more bullish than this. They want to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. He's now talking about how they first met up and discussed, okay, how can we buy Bitcoin in a budget-friendly way? I have already introduced a few things. For example, you can use Bitcoin mining, you can use Bitcoin bonds, you can use customs revenue, you can tap into the Exchange Stabilization Fund, use the surpluses, you could allow tax revenues to be paid in Bitcoin, and you could let people pay for the new gold visas with Bitcoin. There are so many possibilities out there now. And then comes the really crucial statement where he says, hey, a lot of people are asking me, how much Bitcoin do you want? Cynthia Loomis suggested 1 million Bitcoin, but he says, no, we don't want to go with Michael Saylor's suggestion of 5 million Bitcoin either. We want to buy as many Bitcoin as possible. In the last video I made about this, there was a leak where someone said that the US wants to buy an infinite amount of Bitcoin. Then Adam Back chimed in and said, no, you can't buy an infinite amount of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is limited to 21 million. Once you hit 21 million, that's it. And you have to say that there are certain limits to this. That means the US can't buy unlimited Bitcoin. I also don't expect the US to buy something like 5 million Bitcoin because they would drive the price up so much that they wouldn't be able to buy new Bitcoin anymore. Or they would have to print so much money that it puts their own currency at risk. So yeah, that's really bullish. The two big statements were, first, that it's seen on the same level as gold, and that, like with gold, they're trying to accumulate as much as possible. On the other hand, they're saying, okay, hey, we just want to try everything that's possible. He also mentioned that Donald Trump is the president who won't be selling off assets. Instead, Donald Trump is going to be one of the few presidents, or maybe the first in a long time, who will actually accumulate assets. That was also about Howard Lutnick with the pension fund. No, not the pension fund, but the sovereign wealth fund. That's being set up, where he also made a big point saying, hey, Donald Trump is now the first president, who might not be racking up new debt, but instead is actually starting to accumulate assets. Michael Saylor is on the bullish side, saying that with the US Bitcoin and the strategic Bitcoin reserve, the national debt can be brought under control again. I'm still a bit skeptical about that, but in any case, we now have the go-ahead from the White House. Hey guys, we want to buy Bitcoin. We're currently figuring out how to make the budget neutral, and there's no upper limit. We want to buy as much Bitcoin as possible, and for example, he says, hey, what Donald Trump is doing, I can do better myself. I can build my own strategic Bitcoin or crypto reserve. So, I'll link you below to CoinTracking, the best tax reporting tool currently available in the Bitcoin market, where you can automatically generate tax reports and check which coins are tax-free and which aren't. The whole tax situation is something you can't overlook. It's a really important and essential topic if you want to avoid any trouble with the government or the tax office. Nobody wants that in the end. And the coolest part is, with the code BTC Hotel, you even get a discount on signing up for a pro account with CoinTracking. You can actually use it completely for free at first. The first trades are free, and you can even sign up anonymously with just an email address. It's super bullish, so definitely check out CoinTracking, and I'll put the link down below. And now there is an exciting assessment from Goldig Dimitri Speck, who actually discussed this with Dominic Kettner. That was a really, really interesting discussion, and I think it's always important to listen to voices outside of the Bitcoin camp. Check out what he has to say, especially considering that in the last 2 or 3 weeks, gold has definitely outperformed Bitcoin, and we're seeing a gold rally. But he also points out that gold and Bitcoin tend to not exclude each other.
The reason I'm bringing this topic up so clearly is, of course, how things are going to progress in these two markets. You mentioned it yourself, the overlap among investors is quite large. We had the level, where you said it needs to be confirmed first, similar to the level you explained in the last interview. I'll gladly link that for the viewers here again. And we're seeing the first pullbacks, and they're massive pullbacks. On the other hand, we see gold just smiling tiredly and continuing to march upward. So, how does that fit for you?
So when we saw the ER mark, when it was current and figures of hundreds of thousands, 1 million target price for Bitcoin and so on were already being traded, I was thinking more about the Dow Jones, which took 10 years or so to overcome the 1,000 mark, if not longer in the 1980s or whenever that was. And it rose by a few percent over 1,000, stayed there for a few days, and then fell back down again and didn't make it. I was thinking about that with Bitcoin, especially with the Bitcoin price. And it developed similarly, even though Bitcoin, I believe, went up a few percent higher, which isn't unusual given Bitcoin's higher volatility. On another note, central banks, big central banks, aren't going to buy Bitcoin in large quantities. That's not going to happen, not even in the US. That's completely out of the question. Well, even the announcement has already driven the Bitcoin price up. Why would central banks buy something that they can only drive the price up on? And if they ever needed the funds, it would just drop again. So that can only be a losing deal. On top of that, you can leverage gold pretty well, but not Bitcoin and so on. There's really no background to it, no beacon happening, in my opinion. So Trump has really held back a lot from taking any real action. Instead of gradually building up a Bitcoin reserve, the confiscated Bitcoins from crimes are simply not being sold anymore, as was the norm before, but are being held. That has nothing to do with central bank reserves. It's a bit of a way to soothe the voters who might have chosen Trump for that reason, so to speak. But that's not going to be a big deal.
There was a lot of speculation about what news would indeed be revealed at the crypto summit in the White House. But in my opinion, it was a demonstration by those who were looking forward to significant price increases. He introduced the FIFA World Cup there as a host and Trump, and he confirms this as an entertainer, of course, didn't reveal his cards at first in a grand manner.
I found that to be quite an interesting perspective, especially since it points out that there's a really high overlap between the people who buy gold and those who buy Bitcoin. Both groups might want less government, they want independence from the state, they want a certain level of censorship resistance, and they seek decentralization. Gold offers all of that, and so does Bitcoin. There is still a lot of skepticism about the central bank story, and you have to agree with him in part because what you are seeing at the moment, the stockpiles and the pension funds, is partly coming from the government, now from the White House, or there is, for example, the Abu Dhabi pension fund isn't exactly the central bank buying Bitcoin there. But to be fair, we have to say that there is supposed to be a test program happening at the Czech central bank. We definitely have to say yes to the fact that they want to bet on Bitcoin here. We know that Christine Lagarde thinks Bitcoin is crap, and we know that Jerome Powell is now, let's say, okay with Bitcoin, but Jerome Powell also makes it clear that he wouldn't buy any Bitcoin. These days, all the big central bankers are being asked, hey, do you want Bitcoin? They all say, no, I don't want it. But I actually believe that it doesn't have so much to do with pumping the Bitcoin price up or down. Rather, it's more of a sign, a bad sign, like, hey, we have our fiat currency, but now we're bringing in Bitcoin. That's kind of a strange sign, isn't it? It already says, okay, maybe something's not right with our fiat currency. Why do we need to bring in Bitcoin now? Aren't we feeling a bit uncertain about our fiat system now? Moreover, pretty much all the values that Bitcoin represents go against the coercive system that Lagarde and Jerome Powell are trying to sell us, and so on. There's actually a dog coming here. Just look at it. There are actually a lot of street dogs around here. They just live somewhere on the beach or something and are just living their lives. I don't know if they buy Bitcoin. I don't think they do. Make sure to drop a like for the bullish Bitcoin dog. We can ask him, hey, are you buying Bitcoin? For sure, that's the whole thing with the central banks. I do think that central banks will come along at some point, but at the moment it doesn't look like the major central banks are betting on Bitcoin. They're still betting on their shitcoins for now. And what we now know, which Dimitri Speck didn't know during the recording, is that we have statements from Bo Hines saying, hey, we're trying to find other ways to buy Bitcoin, because he mentioned that only the reserves are being converted. We also know that the US wants to buy as much Bitcoin as possible, which is honestly one of the wildest statements ever, and the market doesn't seem to care at all. But what I explained earlier is due to the risk-off sentiment, because right now we're in a risk-off environment. But hey, still, the developments are bullish, and this is also what Michael Saylor says. If we take all the news together, everything that's happening behind the scenes, and now the sentiment shifts back to risk-on, then we could really see a big jump up. Because suddenly people will realize, hey, the capital is back, and there were some things happening, like the US wanting to buy Bitcoin, other countries maybe wanting to bet on Bitcoin too, building their oil trade on Bitcoin, and other sovereign funds and pension funds suddenly getting interested in Bitcoin. The whole topic is still relevant, and it could well be that it makes a splash here. But let me know in the comments what you think about all this. I'll drop a link below to 21 Bitcoin, where you can easily and safely buy Bitcoin. Here, you can use the code Bitcoin Hotel to get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Guys, see you later. I'm signing off here from the sea, or by the sea in El Salvador. Until then, peace out.